Mrs. Lieb earned her MSN at Villanova, and she is going to introduce Dr. Francis Scooty.
Good morning. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Dr. Louis Hugo Francis Scooty is a very unassuming man who shared that unless his mother is in the audience, he really prefers a very short introduction. He also gave me permission to sing out his name. So I promise you the short introduction, and the jury is out on the second. Dr. Francis Scooty received his medical degree and PhD from the University of Alberta and his Master's of Public Health at the Johns Hopkins University. He has been involved in and honored by many professional associations and has dedicated much of his professional life to injury prevention, spearheading public safety awareness initiatives about injury, and publishing research on a wide array of topics, from emergency medicine to sports injury. He founded the Injury Awareness and Prevention Center at the University of Alberta and developed an award-winning multimedia injury prevention program for teenagers. Given his many initiatives, he has been aptly named one of Alberta's top 100 Physicians of the Century by the Alberta Medical Association. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Louis Hugo Francis Scooty.
So somewhere here is my presentation. Let me see if I can figure it out. I'll get someone else to figure that out. And I'll let you know how I actually got here. I was giving a talk in Oman that your dean was at. And I guess she must have liked what the presentation was about. So after I left Oman, I think it was 42 minutes after I left Oman, I got an email from your dean. And she said, we're going to have a very special event next year. Would you consider coming? And I said, well, let me check my calendar. My calendar was full this week. So I said, I'll see what I can do. And she said, well, no, it's very, very special. And you just happen to be the right person for this presentation. And I said, well, why is that? She said, does 1953 mean anything to you? And I said, well, that's the year I was born. She says, what a coincidence. The stars are aligning. And then she said, when's your birthday? Because we're a Catholic institution or a Augustine institution. And I said, well, December 24th. And she says, my goodness, I don't believe this, so close to Christmas. And so I didn't know much about Villanova, so I called one of my friends in Maryland, in Cockeysville, and her son was here in the Faculty of Engineering. And I said, what do you know about Villanova? The College of Nursing asked me to go do a presentation for their 60th anniversary. And so with Colleen telling me to clear my calendar and go, and the dean persevering, I was able to get here. And I can tell you it was one of the best decisions I've made, because ever since getting here, you can tell that an organization has been very good in establishing a culture of openness and feeling welcome and doing good things. And I get that sense at this university. So there's something very special about the people that started this university, and especially your College of Nursing, the colleagues and the students have something that's very unique. And you may not notice it because you're right in the middle of it, but as an outsider who comes into it, I notice it right away. So there's something very special. So what I'm going to try and do is take that initial presentation from Oman and build on it, so that in such a way to really challenge you. Now, the reason I put this slide up is because I truly love Oman. I've been there 6 times. And that's another country that is one of those very special places. So for the students, if you ever have an opportunity to go and do work in Oman, jump on it right away, because you will enjoy it. It's fantastic, especially if you go in the winter. It's a little hot in the summertime. So what I'm going to do is go back to focus on this particular topic. Let's get rid of the patient. You know that everyone in healthcare today is talking about putting the patient at the center of focus. Let's put the patient at the center of the system. Well, I think that's wrong. I think what we have to do is actually focus on getting rid of the patient, because I've yet to meet a patient that wants to be a patient. I've yet to meet a woman with breast cancer that's happy she has breast cancer. I've yet to meet a traumatized teenager who's a quadriplegic that's happy to be paralyzed as a result of their injury. I've yet to meet a mom that's happy that their child has meningitis. I've never met a patient that wants to be a patient. And those that do want to be patients probably have issues as well. So if we start off with the notion that being a patient is wrong in the first place, then we can take what the dean said earlier to an entirely different level. So I think what we have to do is challenge ourselves to think very, very differently about what we do. And we have to train future healthcare providers to think differently. Because right now, we've become slaves to disease, right? We need disease. We need disease to have hospitals. We need disease to have careers. Pharmacy needs diseases. The pharmaceutical industry, I won't say loves disease, but needs disease to sell their products. And so we've built a whole industry around disease, when humans are not really designed to be diseased. Humans are very simple. And if they're well cared for, don't get sick. So that's what I'm going to try and do in the next 3 hours, is try and go over. You did say 3 hours, did you? That's what I'm going to try and do in the next short little while, because I want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to take you into some areas that you may feel a little uncomfortable. I've got a standard joke that I put in, and depending on how you respond to the joke, I'll know how far to push the audience. It's a built-in indicator that tells me if you're awake, alert, and open to different thinking. And then at the end, what we're going to do is have a quick discussion. So I'm going to try and leave about 10 minutes so that you can fire questions at me, because I'm sure I'm going to make you sort of think a little differently than you're thinking right now. So does that work? And the other thing is, you notice, as I'm getting a little younger here, I'm changing my title. So I'm a storyteller. So my business cards now don't have MD, PhD, and all the 7 fellowships. I just write storyteller, because really what I'm going to do is tell you a story. And when humans talk to each other, 50% of your brain is activated. So the fact that we're talking right now, that I'm talking right now, 50% of your brain is activated in listening to me. And that's what I'm going to end on, because the same thing happens when you're using your cell phone and driving. So especially in a population like this, young women, for some reason, like using their cell phones. So when you use your cell phone and you drive, you increase the likelihood you're going to be involved in a collision. So I'm going to end with a little personal advice as to how you can make sure you don't get hurt. So let's get going. So I've got about half an hour to go through. I think it's 42 slides. Now don't try this as an amateur, because you're not supposed to use more than 1 slide a minute, but most of these are pictorial. So if you take the planet that has, they say, about 7 billion people, you take the entire planet and you shrink it down to a village of 100. This is what that village would look like. So you take the entire planet and put it into a village of 100 people, and this is the breakdown of what that planet looks like. And that means that, Americans probably consume about 4.5 people in that village. The other half is a Canadian, all right? So we make up even less than what you make up. But we really don't have that big a footprint on the world in terms of population, okay? The most populated area, as you know, is, Asia, and then Africa, and then Europe, and then Latin America. And the Middle East falls in between sort of Europe and Africa as well. But as you know, the majority of the people living on this planet today live in poverty, all right? So this is where you can start saying, well, wait a second, if we're going to really make a difference as nurses or as physicians, or as a matter of fact, it doesn't really matter if you're an engineer or a lawyer, if we're going to really make a difference in the world, then what we have to understand is how fortunate we are to be living where we're living right now, because the rest of the world isn't as fortunate as us. So no matter how many problems you think you have when you woke up this morning, we really don't have too many problems in relationship to the rest of the world. So what that means is we have to now take this to the next level. And taking it to the next level is I've got to connect with you as an audience. My grandfather told me a long time ago, just because you have an audience doesn't mean that they have to listen to you, right? So you've got all sorts of things going on in your life. You've got your own stressors. You may have illnesses within yourself or your family. You may have a friend that's having some problems. You may have financial issues. You may wonder what the heck you're doing at Villanova. You'd rather be somewhere else. I don't think there's too many, but some of you may be thinking things like that. So I have to cut through all that and try and get a message that's going to resonate to an audience that's very varied. So don't think that one message will work with every audience that you're speaking to. Because in this audience, how many of you are from the silent generation? No. How many women are going to put up their hand here? Right. Most guys do, but no, there's some women that are okay with that. How many of you are baby boomers, 46 to 65? Okay, the boomers have no problem. What about Generation X, 66 to 82? We've got some. And then my favorite generation, Generation Y. How many Yeah, we got the majority Generation Y. And then any Generation Apt from 95 on? So when I was coming down here, my graduate student said, Doc, where are you talking this week? And I said, well, you know, I've got a chance to go down to the States. I'm going to a university called Villanova. And one of them said, Villanova? I said, I don't know. You better be really prepared. That's supposed to be a really tough audience down there. And I said, well, he said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I don't know. I've just heard that one of the other professors went down to Villanova, and they're just looking to stump you all the time. They'll ask you questions that you won't know. So I'm going to test you pretty soon. So I said, well, why don't we rehearse the presentation, and that way I'll make sure they can't ask me anything I don't know. So one of the questions they asked me was, why is Generation Y called Generation Y? And that was a tough one. I said, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I know X, I know baby boomers. Why is Generation Y called Generation Y? And so thank goodness one of my top graduate students went out and found out why Generation Y is called Generation Y. So I am so well prepared, there is no question that you're going to be able to ask me that I won't be able to answer. Now, I hope that's okay at a Catholic university, but... So here's the whole notion of what the problem is. So here's the problem. The problem is that in North America, every year, Canadians and Americans, primarily Americans, spend about $2.8 trillion on healthcare. Trillion dollars on healthcare. And the Institute of Medicine recently took a look at what that money is being used for. And I don't know if you've seen this study, but it's something that you should definitely become familiar with. Because what they found was that no less than $750 billion a year are totally wasted, right? They're wasted in unnecessary services, inefficient delivery of care, excessive administrative costs, inflated prices, prevention failures, and fraud. So if you're the future generation of nurses and nursing leaders, these things are taking place in healthcare systems. So you've got to become very familiar with the fact that this system that's consuming that much money is not as efficient as we would like it to be. And there's an enormous amount of money that's being wasted in it. And as a matter of fact, to give you a perspective of how much money that is, that $750 billion is almost 4 times what the Canadian healthcare system spends annually across the country. And you know the biggest difference between Canada and the US is that we provide healthcare to our population, as we just think it's the right thing to do. And you're trying to move in that direction in the States as well. So the amount of money that's wasted every year in the United States on healthcare as a result of these 6 areas is enough to support our healthcare system in Canada to provide, 38 million Canadians with healthcare for 4 years. So when the Dean challenged you to think very differently about the future, you've got to become familiar when you get into a position of either practice or leadership to start questioning these 6 areas and be prepared to call some people out on this. Now, you have to develop skill sets to be able to do that, and one of them is having difficult conversations. One of the things that humans have a great degree of difficulty with is to have that difficult conversation. We're not trained to have difficult conversations. And so your response when you're about to have a difficult conversation with either a boyfriend, a close friend, a parent, a teacher, and it's going to be a difficult conversation, you will do one of 3 things. You will freeze, and that's a natural reaction. Animals freeze. That's why animals, when they're startled, will just freeze, hoping to try and blend in with the surrounding area. Or you'll react very aggressively, the fight or flight, or the flight one, you'll run away. So one of the things that I strongly encourage you is to make sure that you know how to have a difficult conversation. Telling a patient they have cancer may be a difficult conversation. Telling one of your colleagues about something that's interacting or interfering with healthcare delivery, that's a very difficult conversation. So I hope you spend the time talking to your students about how to have these conversations, and I hope your faculty is trained to have those difficult conversations amongst themselves as well. The other thing that you have to remember, as I said earlier, is that life is not very complicated. For millions of years, this is what we were. We were hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers were constantly on the move. Humans are designed to move. The most dangerous thing that you're doing today is sitting, right? That's the most dangerous thing. I never have meetings where there's chairs in the room. I always start my meetings at 9:17 or 8:48. When you put a weird time on it, people actually show up on time. When you say 8:30, no one shows up. But if you say it's at 8:48 or 9:13, people will actually show up at that weird time. And when they do show up, there's no chairs. No one's allowed to sit in meetings that I chair. And the reason is your brain is so much crisper if you're up and awake and alert. And so for millions of years, we were hunter-gatherers. We roamed around looking for food. We were constantly hungry. And it's funny because this guy looks like most guys that go to the gym want to look like, right? And he doesn't have to go to the gym. And the reason that he looks like that is because the largest organ in the body, the skin, is exposed so that he can feel the wind, pressure, vibration, right? So we've gone from millions of years where the brain has been programmed to look like this, act like this, feel like this, and within the last 28 years, basically, we've gone from this to this. And so what do you think happens now to the brain? What do you think's going on with the brain right now? The brain is saying, oh, great white hunter, you have been such a great provider for your family. Look how much excess, fat you have on you. And so what ends up happening is that the brain is fooled into thinking it's time to hibernate, right? So most people don't look at obesity as being, they think of it as a cardiovascular problem, but it's a far bigger problem than that. Because what ends up happening when we are in a state of such imbalance that the brain is totally confused as to what's going on. And so what the brain wants to do is feel good, because everything we hear about entertainment and everything that we read in magazines is about feeling good. You have to feel good. You have to look good. You have to feel good. You have to look good. You have to feel good, right? There's a whole industry out there that's making you feel inferior so that they can sell you stuff to make you feel better. Now, these things just don't happen by chance. Now, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but I know that there's people far smarter than us that are in rooms right now trying to figure out how to get you to buy the next product, right? And the products they want you to buy are products that are quite similar to this. It's the right combination of salt, fat, and sugar, right? They know exactly how to combine salt, fat, and sugar so that when you get that first bite of that hamburger, what does it do? It releases endorphins in your brain. All these things release pleasure chemicals in your brain. I don't smoke, but I sure love watching people smoke because they sure love smoking, right? I don't think it's the holding the smoke and all the rest of it, but it's the nicotine. And so somebody has salt makes you feel good too. Prescription medication is rampant in this country, right? You will not believe how many Americans and Canadians are dying as a result of the biggest drug pushers out there, right? So physicians are way over-prescribing, way over-prescribing. And anyone else that's prescribing, whether it's a nurse practitioner or other, is way over-prescribing antibiotics, painkillers, and just about every other medicine out there. And so what ends up happening is that you look at these activities and you say, well, they look pretty innocuous. Well, if you look at them and you break them down, so you can see fatty foods, if you can't read them, I'll read them quickly. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and injuries. Drugs, overdoses, addictions, mental illness, crime, injuries. Alcohol, cirrhosis, mental illness, violence. And you can see the pattern. You can see the pattern. We need a healthcare system because people like to engage in these activities because somehow they're just not in the right balance because we've strayed so far from what we were designed to do, right? Now, I don't think you can argue what I've said so far. It's pretty straightforward. Now, if we fast forward, then what we have to say is, okay, well, can you simplify it? Can you simplify it? Well, I can't make it any more simpler than this. 3 risk factors: smoking, inactivity, and poor nutrition. Why don't you do it with me? 3 risk factors. Say them out loud. Smoking, inactivity, poor nutrition contribute to 4 major diseases, okay? So certain cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular events, and chronic pulmonary conditions. And those 4 major diseases account for 50% of the disease burden. And there's actually a website that talks about this, 3450.com. So the whole notion is that if you were to graduate from this school, you really should be able to give a 30-second elevator sort of convincing sales pitch that getting people healthy is really not that complicated. 3 risk factors contribute to 4 major diseases, which account for 50% of the disease burden. Is this making sense so far? Okay. So the good news is that there's some people that are actually starting to believe that we really could be talking about the end of illness. And this is an excellent book by David Agus that was written, I think it was last year. And I really recommend somebody buy this book and put it in the library so that you have access to it. But he really expands far more eloquently than I can on the notion that healthcare providers, whether they're doctors and nurses, and I got myself in trouble earlier this year, last year, when I did an interview with CBC Canada, and I said, why do we need doctors and nurses in the first place? And then I paused, right? Because it's the pause that kills you. Like, why do we need doctors and nurses in the first place? In other words, we need healthcare providers that meet the needs of the patients. But in 2013, do they necessarily have to be labeled as doctors and as nurses? So when you start talking that language, it becomes very intimidating to the nursing profession, and it becomes extremely intimidating to the medical profession. But I think the time has come that the model that served us till today will no longer serve us in the future. The dean alluded to it, but one of the important things you have to remember is that Watson, you know, Big Blue from IBM, Watson's going to be making diagnosis far better than we can very shortly. Watson's already being tested out in various institutions across the country, and it's amazing how quick Watson is learning how to make diagnosis. I've got a very limited memory, you know, probably to do with my age, but I mean, I can remember maybe 10 differential diagnoses for, you know, the most obvious disease. Watson really doesn't care. He'll just work, well, Watson's probably a she, so let's say she will work through that list and come up with a suggested diagnosis that healthcare providers, I don't know if they're going to be doctors or nurses, will then be able to best meet the needs of the patient. But the future of medicine is going to be very, very different than it is today. And somebody has to stand up and say, we've got to start thinking differently about the paradigm that we're in right now. Because as far as patients are concerned, patients really don't care who is taking care of them, as long as it's somebody that's listening to them and is going to make a difference at the end of the day. All right? So let's start off with the notion that when we're born, things are pretty good. I work as an emergency physician. You know, I see a lot of women that are miscarrying in the first term. The human body is designed to go through a quality control process, and if the fetus isn't right to carry on, the body will, you know, terminate that pregnancy itself, because that's why most babies are born perfect. Not all babies, but most babies are born perfect. And so what ends up happening is that if we start off with the notion that 2 half cells within 9 months can turn into trillions of cells working quite well, I think we've developed a very special relationship with nature. And we're going to talk about the environment a little later. So if we take that little baby that's born, and assuming everything's fine, then the first 18 months of that baby's life will determine everything about that baby for the rest of their life. It actually goes back beyond that. So when a woman is pregnant, carrying a child, if she's in a stressful relationship, then her genes in the baby are actually being turned on and off by that stress. It's called epigenetics. So genes in a fetus are actually being turned on and off depending on the stress level that woman's in, especially if she's in an abusive relationship. And that those genes that are then mutated and altered are passed down the next generation as well. So when I'm working in emergency and I see a 16-year-old girl that has 3 kids with her, fathered by different fathers, and is 6 months pregnant, do you think I sort of stop and say, what can I do to help this young woman who's got 3 kids already, and she's got another one, all by different fathers? You know, what's the hope for those kids to amount to anything in life, right? And so, unless you understand that the first 24 months of an individual's life, early childhood development, are the most important formative years, then we're not going to make progress. And you've got to remember, the evidence is pretty clear that under the age of 2, no child should be exposed to a television, because televisions actually rewire the circuitry in the minds of a child. And how many kids are parked in front of televisions at that age? Or how many parents are silly enough to buy those baby genius programs to start using them with their kids at an early age, thinking they're going to turn them into geniuses, when actually they're scrambling their brains in the opposite direction. The only thing a child needs is to be held, touched, sang to, and have an environment of at least 40 adults. It takes 40 adults to raise one child. And so in North America, what we did was, well, if it takes 40 adults to raise a child, why don't we reverse that formula and we'll put one teacher with 40 kids in a school, and let's see what happens. The only good news is that across North America, we've developed the same curriculum for kids in schools. Because it doesn't matter where I go, if I ask kids, how was school today? Boring. What did you learn? Nothing. So at least we've got a standardized curriculum across North America, because kids are not really learning in school, right? And I had the opportunity to talk to the university president last night, and I said, universities have to wake up as well, because students today aren't going to buy into this paradigm of what worked when, you know, the monks were teaching. The monks used to have the books, so they had all the knowledge, and they had power over the students. Teachers don't have much power over students today, because you're connected. Most of you right now are probably Googling, trying to find out, A, is this guy a real doctor? Where is he from? You know, has he got any complaints against him? Because you're connected. You've got information that nobody's had before. And so the only thing I think universities can do is give you 60 years worth of mistakes and show you how to not make those mistakes. And if you do make mistakes, to learn you've made a mistake and how to correct that mistake. Okay? I think roles of universities in the future is going to be very, very different. We can't be knowledge brokers. You have access to that knowledge. What we have to be is better mentors. Okay? That's where I think we need to go. Now, the one thing I mentioned is, you have an option. You either spend the money in early childhood development when the brain is more malleable, or you're going to spend it later, right? You're going to spend it later. And that's why we spend so much money with our criminal system, our judicial system, our penitentiary system, our social service system, and you name it, right? We're spending an enormous amount of money. So you have the option. You spend it earlier and you get a greater return, or you spend it later and you live in gated communities. It's your choice. You don't have too many options. So what makes us healthy? If you are silly enough to believe that the healthcare system makes you healthy, then I've got to sort of dispel that notion and tell you that the healthcare system may contribute 25% of your health. The things that make you healthy have got nothing to do with the healthcare system. All right? And why do we even call it a healthcare system? I've yet to meet a healthy person come into emergency say, "Hi doc, I'm here with my family, we're all healthy, we're eating well, we're exercising, absolutely nothing wrong with us." Great, because it's a healthcare system, we only see healthy people. It's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system. Call it for what it is. If you're healthy, you don't need it, right? But I guess it feels warm and fuzzy to say, we have a healthcare system. And if you look at Senator Wilbert Keon from Canada's report in June 2009 on the determinants of health, he lays out the case very clearly that money spent in these other areas, which are known as the social determinants of health, and you notice spirituality is there because that's important for your health, will give you a far greater return than spending money in healthcare. And we showed you how much money we're spending in healthcare nowadays. Now, I left a copy of this book with the school, The Spirit Level. It's a great book that came out of the UK by Wilkinson and Pickett. And it talks about if we were to spend time as a society and make sure that everyone had a fair share of the pie, at the end of the day, everyone would be far richer, right? It's a concept that takes a little bit of getting used to. But the notion that we really have to do far more for those that don't have is laid out in this book very, very clearly. So what can you do as a practitioner? Well, make absolutely sure you know what your patient's blood pressure is. And if it isn't in the 115/75 range, get it there. And how do you get it there? Sure, you can use medication, but you can also get them to lose weight, get them to exercise on a regular basis, get them to take 10,000 steps a day. And if you want to drop your blood pressure immediately, just go walk in the wilderness, walk in the green. Walking in the green in a park will actually lower your blood pressure. Waist size, very simple. When we were created, the creator, she put a little hole in our abdomen. So get a measuring tape and go where that hole is. It's called the belly button. The only reason it's there is so that you put a measuring tape around it. And if men, you reach over 40 inches, you got a problem. Women, it's 37 inches. Make sure each and every one of you are taking at least 10,000 steps a day. Know your TSH, know your blood sugar, know your cholesterol. Your resting heart rate in the morning when you wake up should be about 60. And you should get 7 to 8 hours sleep a night. That's all you need to do. If you know these numbers, this is the scorecard for your patients. If you know these numbers, then you're going to be able to offer them what they need to know. So a patient should say to you, well, what should I eat? Well, my philosophy is this. If you leave it out on the counter and it doesn't go rotten in a day or two, don't eat it. Right? Why would you eat something that you can leave out on the counter for 3 months and a fly won't even land on it? I mean, do you think that's good? I don't think so, right? You should only eat stuff that rots. If it rots, it means it's pretty close to nature, right? It's a simple philosophy. Now, don't eat the rotten stuff, but eat it just like as it's getting ripe, for fruits especially. But berries, any kind of berry, the brighter the berry, the better. Any kind of legume, the brighter the color, the better. Alpha 3 omega eggs, yogurt, green tea, spices, nuts, and turkey without the skin on it. Those are the only foods you really need. These are the superfoods that have been proven to reduce cancer, reduce macular degeneration, keeping your brain sharp and active, keeping your joints working. These are the superfoods. And if you eat nothing more than that, you'll be a healthy person. What are the chances you're going to find that in an inner city? What are the chances you're going to find that where people that need it the most absolutely have no access to it? Okay? So this becomes then a little more complicated. Well, let me try and simplify it because I try and keep things simple. If I told you I found a medicine that can reduce diabetes by 58%, it can reduce the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's by 50%, it can reduce postmenopausal hip fractures by 41%, reduce arthritic knee pain by 47%, and the list goes on. Would you say that is a startling discovery for your patients? Wouldn't you like to prescribe this treatment for your patients? Yet, what is the treatment that does all these things? What is the treatment that does all these things? Half an hour of exercise a day. And the reason it's called 23 and a half hours is there's a very brilliant little clip on YouTube. When they do a thing and some guy's writing on a whiteboard? Well, go and look at this. It's 7.5 minutes. I show it to all my patients. And in half hour of exercise a day, what you're able to do is get these benefits right here. And most medicine will not give you anything near this kind of benefit. All right? So what I'm trying to do is tell you that things are actually simpler than we thought of in terms of how to get patients healthy and how to get rid of patients. In your age group, injury is the leading cause of death. If you're under the age of 34, motor vehicle related injuries are the leading cause of death. If you're between the ages of 0 and 19, by far injury is the leading cause of death. So this is something that should be very, very high on your radar screen, especially in your age group. I just got back from South Africa, and I had the opportunity to talk to the surgeons in South Africa. And I told them that, why don't you men and women get out of the confines and the comfort of your operating rooms and actually start dealing with the trauma that's out there by trying to prevent trauma in the first place rather than treating it. Since the majority of trauma deaths occur at the scene of the injury, all the helicopters, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and ICUs and operating rooms are going to make no difference for those patients. They're going to die at the scene of the injury. And it's the leading cause of death for your age group, the majority of you. Now, the thing you have to remember is that adolescent brains, and I would say up to the early 20s, I won't say don't work, but they don't really work in terms of assessing risk. And that's why young people get into trouble when they try and do risk assessment, because that part of the brain has not been fully developed yet. This article in October 2011 of National Geographic, Beautiful Brains, is a must-read for you if you want to try and find out why young people are engaged in risky activities. I've got 2 young males at home, and I can tell you, we live on an acreage, and so they've got plenty of opportunities to get into trouble. And so when I come home and they've done one of their, I call them silly things, as long as I sit them down, look at them in the eyes, and I ask them, boys, what the heck were you thinking when you did that? As long as they say, well, I don't know, then I know they're telling the truth. Anything more than that is a lie. And they've figured this out, because when they've got their friends over and they've done something really dumb, then they go to their buddies. I can know what they say. They go, when Dad asks us why we did this, just go, well, I don't know. And that's because the brain starts getting myelinated from the occiput down to the frontal regions, and it takes from the age of about 14 to 21, 22 till it's fully myelinated. And that's why adolescence, whether it was in the days of Aristotle or whether it's going to be 100 years from now, adolescents will always have trouble assessing risk. And that's why adolescents get into trouble with all sorts of different activities, high-risk activities, because they just can't assess the risk. Now, where's Suzanne Smeltzer? Is she? Oh, there you are. Well, the only reason I'm pointing you out is because I did some background work before I came to Villanova for all these tough questions that I was going to be asked. And I know that you do a lot of work with folks with disabilities and making sure that they're healthy. The day I arrived here in Philly, I always read the local paper. Here's another example of a young man with autism that was killed in a house fire. And I'm pointing this out because if there's any student looking for a research project, injuries in the disabled population is what's the word? It's just not picked up on anyone's radar screen. I do a lot of work with injuries, but injuries in the disabled population is a much bigger problem than anybody knows about. And no one's ever written a really good paper about it, and no one's ever developed an area of interest. So if you're looking for an area of interest, this is one area that I strongly recommend you take a look at. Suicide. Do you think suicide's a big problem within our society today? I mean, in Alberta, suicide is the leading cause of injury death. More Albertans kill themselves than die in car crashes. Do you think family violence is a major problem? Absolutely. I, unfortunately, had to stop asking women in our emergency department if they were in an abusive relationship because I was picking up so much of it, there was no resources to deal with it. Okay? Major issues. Do you think substance abuse is a problem? Tobacco, alcohol, drugs? Yes. Well, the question is, why are so many people needing these drugs? What's missing in their lives that they have to resort to drugs to feel good? Right? That's the big question. Fatigue is a major problem within our society. We are over-fatigued, okay? Nobody talks about it. We have to sleep 2/3 of our life, basically. 1/3 of our life, sorry. Don't sleep 2/3, yeah. We have to sleep 1/3 of our life because something amazing happens to your brain when you sleep. Mental illness or brain health issues, as an old psychiatrist taught me, he says, don't use mental, it scares people. Talk about brain health. If I was to ask you how many of you in this room today suffer from brain health issues, very few of you would feel comfortable putting your hands up. Yet I know that 30 to 40% of you should put your hands up. And most of you won't, so most of you will self-medicate. This is a major, major, major problem that we don't feel comfortable talking about. I've got 3 more slides, and then I'll open up for questions. If there's no questions, I'll just chat a little longer, okay? I'd much rather have questions. What do we all crave? Chocolate, isn't it? It never fails. It's either chocolate from a woman or sex from a man. It's always the answers that I hear. Yes, we crave chocolate, but what do we really all crave as humans? Absolutely. Absolutely. We rarely talk about it, but we crave it. And Harvey Brenner at Hopkins taught me that this is probably the most powerful determinant of your health. Your ability to love and your ability to be loved. And that's why when our kids were growing up, every night we lined them up. My wife thought I was crazy, but we did it every night. They lined up in front of the mirror. We taught them how to floss. And as they were flossing and flicking all those things, on the mirror that we all do, I forced them all to look at each other in the eye. And what's your name again? Lynn. So Lynn would look at Lynn, and Lynn, looking at Lynn, would say, Lynn, I love you. And if she felt comfortable doing that, then that's a very important connection that we make with each other. Because if you can't say you love yourself, how the heck are you going to love others or have others love you. And you know when you're in love. So a lot of young women here, some of you may be in a relationship that just started. You know that feeling I'm talking about? It only lasts 6 months, so enjoy it. But the whole point is you know when you're in love because you go, what the heck is that? Feels good, right? And that's what a child feels. That's what a child feels when it looks at its mom. So you want to be happy. I know you want to be happy. Here's what happiness is. 50% is genetic. You either have it or you don't. 10% will come from a better education and money and stuff. But 40% of happiness within your life can come instantly from volunteering. If you're not a happy individual and you want to get happy, start volunteering. And you'll notice immediately how happy you are. Okay? Because happiness is based on a very strong social support and volunteering. This stuff doesn't make you happy. It makes you happy for like a little bit, but it clutters your house with junk, right? And our houses are full of junk because we bought stuff thinking it was going to make us happier. And it does for a little bit, but then after that you're not happy anymore, right? So I'm going to give you an exercise that you're going to fail. Are you ready? I've given this exercise around the world probably 1,000 times. I've never met one audience that's able to do what I'm going to tell you to do and pass the test. So I'm telling you, you're about to fail this test. Are you ready to fail? Because there's no way on earth you're going to pass this test. Are you ready? Work real hard. Prove me wrong so I can say, when I was at Villanova, that 60th anniversary, something weird happened. They actually passed the test. Are you ready to fail a test? I want you to listen to what I say carefully and only do what I say. I want you to look at the person next to you in the eyes and smile right now. All right. I don't know. This reminds me of that movie that Tom Cruise was in with Jack Nicholson. I don't know what kind of outfit you run here, Dean, but these are losers. I told them that they were going to fail, and they failed. I told you to look at the person next to you in the eyes and smile. That would look like this. Did I say laugh? Did I say carry on? Did I say feel good? No. And the reason you can't help but do it is the moment you do this, you become a drug pusher. Because you release the most powerful chemicals known to man, and that's why you feel good, and that's why you keep laughing, and you keep doing it forever and ever. Have you ever made the mistake on a plane, on a long flight, when the little kid looks up over the seat, and you go, ha ha, and the kid goes, oh, what the hell was that? That felt good. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Whatever was that? Because that kid just got a shot of the most powerful endorphin. And that's why a kid will do that for how long can you play peekaboo with a kid? Forever. And the reason is it's the most powerful thing we do to each other. All right, I've got to close and then we've got time for questions. If you want to be successful in what you do, here's the rules that I follow and I review them on a daily basis. Have a cause. There's got to be a reason why you're doing what you're doing. Listen carefully to others. The rule is simple. You've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you speak. Very hard for some people. Do your homework. Before you do anything, make sure you know everything about what you're about to do. Speak the language of the people you're talking to. Know your abilities. Keep your promises. Let others take the credit for what you do. Hardest thing for a human. Be driven by passion. Care for what you do. Know your needs. Have fun. And the last most powerful one is the smile. I'm going to leave you with a personal advice, tip on how to make sure that you actually get through the rest of your training. When the phone in your vehicle is in the vehicle and the vehicle's in motion, the phone should be off. Because the moment you get that bing, you know that bing you get when you get a text message? You get an endorphin release in your brain. And it says, my goodness, you are so important. Somebody wants to talk to you. Look how important I am. I've got a message. Look, I got a message. Someone wants to talk to me. And so it becomes addictive. It's almost impossible to ignore that. So my advice to you is if you don't want to end up in a crash and end up getting killed or dying, and I see these patients on a regular basis, then do not use your cell phone when you're driving. Hands held or hands free, doesn't matter, it's the conversation, that's the distraction. Hopefully that's been able to help you a bit. We can take a few questions, and then I'm around for the rest of the day if you have any questions at all. If you don't want to ask me personally, you can just send me a quick email at drlou.ca, and I'll try and answer you as best I can. Are there any questions? Yes. Just shout it out real loud. Yeah, Villanova means new village, right? So maybe this new thinking starts at this university within this school of nursing. And someone has to stand up and say, really, enough is enough. We've got the best of all worlds. We know how to treat a lot of stuff, but our focus in the future will be to try and prevent this stuff from happening in the first place. So someone has to stand up and do it and be prepared to take the flack, because you will take a lot of flack from people that have vested interests. So the dean took a chance. I mean, she brought a crazy guy from Canada down to talk to you about getting rid of the patient. I think that's pretty bold.
We're about to move forward into a new kind of healthcare system in the United States. Are there some kinds of groups of fire around everybody when you get something to the nursing might be able to look at a little differently as we go to new systems such as Canada?
Yeah, I think that Canada's system's okay, but it still focuses on illness, right? So I'm trying in Canada to get them to not focus on illness. I'm the incoming president of the Canadian Medical Association, so as of August, I'll have a pretty big pulpit. I'm going to upset a lot of people by what I have to say, but so be it, right? The reality is somebody has to stand up and say what's right. And as long as everything you say is the truth and it's based on evidence, then I think we'll be safe. But I think the nursing profession is well poised to leap in bounds with this kind of thinking, because I think it's the nursing profession that has provided a lot of leadership in the future. And I think right now that the whole healthcare system is muddled with who's doing what, I think nurses could really step out, and you should be zigging while everyone else is zagging. Everyone else is zagging, start zigging. Sounds good, eh? Like a rap song.
Get jiggy with it.
Any other quick questions? Yes? No, I saw your hand go up with the microphone.
It's just dancing.
Well, just ask a question for the heck of it. Yes?
Anything is what pays for it, money. So in the United States, coming from the healthcare delivery system, what drives healthcare is the reimbursement system. So right now, the reimbursements are not going toward preventive care, nutrition, to the extent that they should be. Do you see that changing either in Canada or the United States?
Yes, it has to change because the system's broke. We can no longer afford to continue to pay what we're paying. Companies can no longer afford healthcare coverage. Governments are going broke in Canada, spending over 50% of their budget every year on healthcare. So the time is right for someone to step up and say, hey, we've got a simple way that we can actually save costs. Get rid of the patient. And then stand firm when you make that statement. And I think that nurses are well poised to do that. I know, because I married a nurse, so I know how nurses think. Yeah, good question. How do we combat the pharmaceutical industry telling our patients that everything can be solved with a pill? By saying the things that we said today. This PowerPoint will be available to you, and you can use it in whatever way you want. And we're just a little over, so I'll wrap it up. But remember, the only thing that I want you to remember from this presentation, and you can only remember one thing from any presentation, is to get rid of the patient. It's no longer acceptable to put the patient at the center of care. Your focus should be on getting rid of the patient because no patient wants to be a patient. Thank you very much.